Historical inaccuracy when it comes to fashion and style in movies is nothing new. But now with the ideas of iPhone face, studios are not only getting called out on their historical inaccuracies in the actual fashion itself, but in the way that the actors actually look. Especially because of the popularity of the TV show Bridgerton, and also the announced casting of Margot Robbie and Jacob Elordi in the new Wuthering Heights movie. Now, the easy culprit of iPhone face is of course plastic surgery, but I would say it's less plastic surgery and more Botox and filler specifically. Whether the people getting it realize it or not, Botox and filler does not video well. It kind of only looks good in pictures, because when you move your face and it doesn't move correctly in the way that an actual human's face should, it's very uncanny valley and people are going to realize it. Especially in the historical context, because literally nobody had these procedures at all at that time. Like when you watch a reality TV show like The Secret Lives of Mormon Wives and people literally cannot cry because they have so much Botox injected in their face, it kind of still makes sense. But when you see someone with that much Botox in historical context, you're like, oh my gosh, they look like they're possessed by the changeling. From what I've seen on these Instagram accounts that claim that they do undetectable injectables, no, you do not. There is no such thing as an undetectable Botox or filler injection, especially when these procedures are done on clients that are younger and already have a full face and no wrinkles. We just notice it. It doesn't necessarily mean that these people look bad, it's just you can tell that they got these injections. And when you see it on somebody in historical context, it pulls you out of that TV show or movie because nobody looked like that in the past. And I'm not trying to generalize the entire past beauty trends, but there's a lot of beauty trends that have only come out after the turn of the 20th century. So when we see these things in a more historical context than that, they look very noticeable and very out of place. Historically speaking, dental hygiene was not on the top priority for most of history. So actors that have had braces or Invisalign or retainers might look a little bit out of place, but I don't think it's fair for them to compromise their health just for a look, especially when that look was probably rough. Paul Giamatti actually made it look like all his teeth were rotten out when he played John Adams for more historical accuracy, and Johnny Depp of course went full bore and made it look like some of his teeth were rotten as well. He also made it look like he had syphilis, so dude was pretty committed to the bit. Veneers, however, are so much worse. I hate veneers to begin with, honestly. They always remind me of that scene from Friends where Ross whitens his teeth too much and then Phoebe thinks that he's a demon. They're too uniform, they're too toilet bowl white. It weirds me out. So when you put somebody that has veneers in these types of historical media, yeah, they're gonna look out of place. Now, it's not just the popularity of plastic surgery that we see in actors today, but it's also the makeup trends that are popular in society versus the makeup trends that were popular historically. Now, obviously, like I said, very different depending on what time period you're talking about. Like if I am an actor and I rock up full unibrow to a movie about ancient Greece, gonna fit in. If I rock up with a full unibrow to Regency England, not gonna fit in. But oftentimes these historical makeup trends are being abandoned for our modern makeup trends. Like back in the Victorian times, people used to paint their faces with lead because they wanted to look weak and like they had tuberculosis, because it meant that they were rich enough that other people were doing work for them, which is actually still very similar to today, where people still want to look like they have a lot of money, but in the US people more want to look tan and very healthy because it means that they have more time to take care of themselves instead of worrying about one of those, commoner jobs. Also, old-timey Photoshop is something that we can't forget as well, because if you look at paintings done, say, in like the 1500s, like for women, they oftentimes wanted to look like they had larger foreheads, paler skin, and a fuller face. So realistically, these women might not have looked like that at all, and what we're basing our historical context off of might not even be real. In fact, many people through history probably looked a lot more like us than we realize. I always think of the one statue that the Romans made about the Celts, and I'm like, I know that guy, I swear I've seen him before. So people really haven't looked that different through history, it's just how they're presented. Like, did you know that the Vikings really never wore the horned helmets? And yet we have some weird fascination with always putting Vikings in the horned helmets. Or the Trojan, feathered Greek helmet, that really wasn't very popular in ancient Greece either. But back to makeup, like I said, Margot Robbie's getting heat for being cast in Wuthering Heights because people are saying that she has an iPhone face. Now allegedly, Margot Robbie has gotten work done. I think people are saying that she had a couple veneers and buccal fat removal and eyelid removal surgery. But unlike when people get Botox and filler, these procedures seem to be much less noticeable. Now, very easy to say that Margot Robbie has iPhone face when she just played Barbie, literal Barbie, the plastic doll. But people are forgetting that Margot Robbie has already been cast in historical roles. She played Sharon Tate in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, where she was dressed and her makeup was done like the 1960s. I actually think that the makeup on this movie was done really well in general because all of the actresses look like they belong in the 60s, including Sydney Sweeney, who is another actress that's often accused of having iPhone face. But Margot Robbie also starred in the movie Mary, Queen of Scots, where her makeup is completely different than the beauty standard today. She looks like the beauty standard of that time because the creators of the movie prioritized historical accuracy over our modern standards. Compare this to Dakota Johnson in the movie Persuasion. Now, do I think that Dakota Johnson has an iPhone face? Not really. I think that this movie was just bad. Persuasion is a book written by English author Jane Austen in 1817, and the movie doesn't use this historical language. Is it a shock to think that they probably follow modern beauty trends when it comes to makeup and hair as well? No. Like, just a personal bias, I am really not a fan of the 1920s haircuts for women, but when I watch The Great Gatsby, do you think I'm sitting there like, oh, this movie would be so much better if these women had Victoria's Secret blowouts? No. Because that wouldn't make sense historically. I also do want to mention men because we do see it a little bit with them as well. Like, these male historical roles are still being affected by things like veneers and injectables, but historically speaking, most societies did not put lots of makeup on men, so it is a little different than the women. But one thing that I've noticed that a lot of films and TV shows are very afraid of is sideburns. They hate the sideburns. Listen, if it was like 1850 and you were cool, you had sideburns. Today, no. They took Jonathan Bailey's away in Bridgerton, and immediately in the second season, everyone was like, oh my gosh, why'd he get so much hotter? Literally, because they just took his sideburns away. But I also want to mention functional muscle versus ego lifting, because that is very important as well. Ego lifting is basically the act of lifting weights solely for the look of them rather than for health or function, and with the introduction of steroids in the late 20th century, these ego lifter muscles are very different than functional muscles. A lot of bodybuilders do bulk and then cut, where they eat a bunch of food and gain a bunch of muscle, and then they cut everything so that all the fat melts off their body and muscle is all that's left. This leaves them very lean and kind of like the beauty standard of today, which is what a lot of actors are doing in movies. But historically, these bodybuilding tactics and even a lot of the exercises that these bodybuilders used were not around, so almost all of the muscle that they built was solely from doing work. The TV show Merlin, I think, does a really good job at this because Bradley James, who plays Arthur, and the other knights are very strong, but they look like they built muscle through things like sword fighting and training rather than going to a gym and bench pressing. Like, these guys are obviously very big and strong, but they look big and strong in a way that makes sense historically. Like, Alexander Ludwig makes a great Viking, and he very obviously goes to the gym and trains to keep this physique, but if he was pumped up on steroids, it would be pretty obvious. But modern beauty standards are getting in the way of historical accuracy, and now that these beauty standards are so unrealistic, they look so out of place in history. But a lot of these more accurate historical movies are not setting out to make their actors look attractive. If they are attractive, they just happen to be attractive in the movie as well. Like, Keira Knightley's pretty anyway. She's gonna look pretty in the Pirates of the Caribbean, and she's gonna look pretty in real life as well. But a show like Bridgerton that is so dependent on a love story and people being attracted to the actors is willing to sacrifice some of the historical accuracy to help the audience find these actors more attractive. And you can kind of get away with it in a series like Bridgerton because the books were written in the modern day for a modern audience. But when you're making a movie out of books that were written in the 1800s, it's a little bit more important to have historical accuracy. There are sideburns in Pride and Prejudice. But if there's true historical basis to the media that's being created, like with the TV show Merlin or the new movie The Odyssey, I think that there should be more of an effort to make them historically accurate. And I will mention this because my queen, my everything, Scooby-Doo, is of course always at the forefront of my mind. Obviously, Scooby-Doo is not historical and it practically lives outside the realm of time and space, but it shows how much the production really cared about the authenticity of the 1960s and the importance that it plays in this modern story. Overall, I think it just kind of boils down to care. A lot of productions, it's very obvious that the people in charge really cared about the story or the time period. In other ones, it seems very much more like they were just trying to make money. But that's it for today, guys. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and as always, have a great rest of your day.